And the next issue is the sales tax.
Starting at the November meeting, the mayor said at the next Finance and Administration meeting, which was the end of November, can you bring forth, sort of like an outline of what sales tax alternatives are out there? And all I do is just keep formalizing it more. I turned it into, this is an example of the ballot language. This is an example of the ordinance. You would still want to take this. I still have to go through bond counsel to make sure that all the language was appropriate. I still have the same concerns that I did at the end of November, that if you don't dedicate the revenue to a particular project or debt service schedule, you risk that sales tax being used as part of the Star Bonds project. And there's no way out of that. It just becomes like our 1 cent, it gets dedicated to the project. This quarter cent would get dedicated to the project. So I think in our own best interest and in the best interest of the rest of the community, tying it to some type of debt instrument becomes really important, because I don't think you should lose the potential for that revenue at the gateway. Which, by the way, had it been built in the time that it was, they would have contributed to the quarter cent, which would have paid for the community center. So I think that's something that we should, always kind of keep in the back of our head, that, one of our largest sales tax generators could end up not contributing anything and it going to their project, which I think they should have to contribute something besides transportation utility fee and occupational licenses. They should pay for some of the improvements that we have in our community.
So this wordage that you have, the verbiage on here, does that take into that? It doesn't sound to me that it does.
It does.
Does it?
There's kind of a catch-all at the end of frame principal and interest, or the principal or interest of outstanding debt or debt that's being issued.
Anybody have any thoughts on this?
What is there any plan to reduce the TUF if the quarter cent sales tax passes?
It's not in that ballot language. That's really a policy of the city council.
Could the city council make a resolution to do that if it passes?
Absolutely, they could. A resolution is a statement of policy. And that policy, once enacted upon by the city council, could become what you decide to govern by. Understand that a resolution is not an ordinance, which means that it's not law. It's simply policy.
That could change back once.
Another group of elected officials could decide they...
Is that April, the election?
No, I've put nothing on here.
No, okay. But when do you want it to go for election?
I just put together this page together. Say this is the
turn in our 211 budget to make that resolution on the other thing. So the other one is dead.
The 2012 budget?
Yeah. Right? Before we finalize that.
I brought it up for discussion. I'm just wondering what other people's thoughts are.
On whether we would want to look at a resolution connecting TUF and sales taxes in capacity?
Reducing TUF by the amount proportional to the sales tax that's brought in.
Well, again, I mean, I've had this conversation. I don't think the two should be connected. What I personally believe is the sales tax is a very good way to pay for transportation improvements. I personally would support a sales tax if the sales tax were to be put in place by the voters, which the voters would have to do. I would then want to look at the kind of that roadmap of our projects, and if TUF is needed less, then so be it. I think
Needed less.
well, again, I think if you look at my priority of how to fund streets, I would say sales tax is my top priority. I personally think a quarter cent would be a good use of sales tax money. I don't believe that the quarter cent is enough to fund all of our needs.
I'm not saying it's enough to fund it all.
And so what I'm trying to communicate to you is, just me, you asked for opinion, just me personally, that if that were to be in place, then I would want to look at how much more additional money is needed and how much, TUF is, and do that math. I don't think there's going to be an opportunity to reduce TUF a whole great amount, but that's not saying that we couldn't if it's not all needed. That's just me personally.
Any other comments?
Well,
Debbie?
and we stated up front that that's the most conservative value. It's already on the tax bill for December. So for this coming year, we have a lot of other things that we haven't taken into consideration. Those are the projects that are outlined right now. There may be other ones that come up, but sales tax, I agree, is conducive to paying for road activities. We said up front we were going to do a dedicated fee for that. One thing we never looked at was, does it have to be 10 years? It could have been 12.
On the sales tax?
Exactly, on the
Right.
sales tax or on the TUF. I
Well,
mean, that was brought up, and
I
that
think-
never even made the headline.
I think the information brought to us on the sales tax is the max it can be is 10 years.
Right.
On the TUF, it's a year-to-year vote. That's part of our annual budget. I mean, you can't,
But that's the way it was allocated. Otherwise, we couldn't have come up with $72 per residential property.
what do you mean that was the way it was allocated? I'm not following what you're saying.
For purposes of looking at the transportation fund, it's a dedicated fund for 10 years.
Had you made it not 10 and 15, you wouldn't collect $72, you might collect 48.
That's right.
Yeah, that was
Well-
what it was
Just
calculated on.
It's just projected.
It's a projection.
Okay, I think I'm following what you're alluding to is the fact that we went into the discussion last summer with a defined 38 million need, with the defined goal of 15 million locally over 10 years, 1.5 a year, that the exercises and discussions we went through led to a formula, a funding percentage of $72 for TUF to get to that goal, is what you're alluding to.
Right.
That if we're to continue those policies for 10 years, that would get us to our goal. Yeah.
Well, I don't necessarily think that is the way, I don't think that's necessarily the way the quarter-cent sales tax has been sold to some folks who are not in favor of the transportation utilities fee, including by our mayor.
I agree.
And so I'm just saying that, candidly, I think the mayor and Will are probably more in step on the way the quarter-cent sales tax, based on the way I've heard her talk. And I'm not trying to speak for her, but correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but there has been this one-for-one kind of, it can offset part of the burden of the TUF.
Yeah, but it also started with a half cent. With the idea that if we had a half cent, well, there would be no need for TUF because it would raise $1 million.
Less need.
Yeah, and so what happened was, and then we started backing down off the half cent with the feeling that the half cent's too much of a quarter, but then that didn't replace, I mean, a quarter isn't equivalent to a transportation utility fee. And so you start, what happens is everybody's then throwing out variations of a sales tax and transportation utility fee. And I kind of come back to the number that we started with is, you're looking to raise 1.5 million. What's the best way to raise 1.5 million? One way to raise 1.5 million is if you passed a half-cent sales tax, $1 million's a sales tax, 250,000 is special highway, 250,000 is a transportation utility fee. It would be one-third what the rate is, or it's 2 mil, depending on how you want to look at that.
And the state kicked in their percentage.
Yeah, that's the 250 for special highway.
Dave, I would agree with you. I mean, I know I was at a lot of those forums, and I know most of my council members were as well. The mayor did allude to the sales tax would relieve the pressure, and the way I look at it is, and the way I kind of interpreted some of the comments she made, although it's just my interpretation, could be wrong, is that for every dollar we have from the sales tax, that's a dollar that we don't need to get from somewhere else, which means there's less pressure on the TUF, which means there's an opportunity to look at lowering it. I don't disagree with that language. The concern I would have in addressing Will's question is that I don't think that quarter-cent sales tax is going to relieve enough pressure to be able to reduce or just eliminate the TUF. That's just me personally.
Well, based on what community members have inferred, that at least that I've taken from this, is many of the residents that have contacted me are not as concerned about what the residents are paying. They're more concerned about the churches, the schools, and the small businesses. So would you take it from that and put the rest on the residential properties? That's where we get into a whole litany of how to fund infrastructure. We've had people, Connie and I have had a large group, a neighborhood association, that is really interested in it being taken off the churches and the schools. Then we heard another element of that
But
is the
then it
small
would be
businesses.
unconstitutional.
Yeah, that's a state issue, not
That's
a
what I'm-
local issue.
I understand. But those are the things that are being,
Then it's not a fee, it is a
Vetted.
tax. It is unconstitutional.
You know, again, well, I'm all for a sales tax because I think it does really pressure not only on a TUF, but on, you know, if you don't like a TUF, probably the most likely scenario besides that's a property tax, which I don't like as much either. So, you know, I like the idea of a sales tax, but I'm concerned, as I think Dave tried to articulate, that there is an expectation in our community that if we go forth a sales tax and it passes, that there is some type of then automatic rejection of the TUF, and that's just not the way it works, and I'm not interested in that type of connection personally.
Well, with my ear to the ground and my finger to the wind and everything, just from what everybody has conveyed to me, that if the city is anticipating putting onto the ballot a quarter-cent, renewing the quarter-cent sales tax, if there's not any guarantees that the TUF's going to go down, they're not going to vote for it.
That would
And
be my,
that's their choice.
and that would be my concern about putting anything forward right now is why waste our time and money if there's not interest in supporting it.
Yeah.
So you just let the quarter sunset and do nothing about it?
You know, again, I personally think a quarter cent is an excellent way, as good of a way as there is to pay for road improvements. But, you know, I don't disagree with what Will is hearing. And, you know, I don't know what other options we have right now.
It's another question. Hold on a minute. Is it understood that that the objective of the TUF then or now or always has been to collect a certain amount?
A dedicated source.
Right, a dedicated source, but Mike was alluding to, as there's more development, then proportionally everybody else goes down.
Right.
Has that always been the thinking?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
nuance for Dave, but all I'm saying is that can be another piece of it for small business that feels that they're being unduly burdened by this. That, again, if I'm missing it, I'm guaranteeing you that 95% of the people that live in this community are missing that element of it, that it's a flat number, not a percentage, but it's a $830,000 less appeals, and as there's more development, that just means everyone's percentage goes down. And if all of you already had that and got it, good for you. But I don't know if we've necessarily done a very good job of communicating that to the small businesses.
but
But if we have an additional revenue stream coming in, then why can't that be lowered proportionally all the way around anyway?
the true benefactor of not passing that quarter-cent sales tax is the businesses. Because that's a quarter-cent more they have.
Or
Is that not true?
it's a quarter cent less that a consumer has to pay to shop there.
Yeah.
I mean, if I buy a $10 item, you know, then I save 20, it's 25 cents less to buy it in Mission than it would be, you know.
A $100 item would be 25 cents.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what I
thank
was
you,
going to say.
thank
It's
you.
not for,
So a $100 item is 25 cents less, you know, I don't think it makes a huge difference. But you're right, traditionally businesses like to operate in lower sales tax environments to be more competitive.
If I were a developer, I'd be really happy if you wouldn't collect the other quarter cent, because I would use it in establishing my CID.
that's right.
Prairie Village is seeing that argument right now. You know, what I did see it, they went through it as it related to the CID for corn in Prairie Village.
They'll just they'll just use it in their formula, and as long as they stay within a range.
And if we don't collect it, who knows, the state may be back for more. They took a cent off of us last
Yeah,
year.
but he's saying they're gonna take the cent away.
No, they're not.
That's what he's been saying,
Who?
Brownback.
Oh, Brownback has been publicly saying he doesn't want to take the cent away.
It's
Yeah.
already there. Once it's
I know it, but then
dead.
he is saying that,
But nonetheless, I think, Will, you asked a question just at the end, and I don't disagree with your thinking, that if we had a quarter cent, it relieves pressure on the transportation budget, which gives us the opportunity to keep the other taxes as low as possible. And I would, you know, if the resolution...
And with a combination of increased number of businesses, i.e. Gateway East and West, and additional sales taxes collected there, additional traffic, TUF would just keep going down and down.
If you would, I mean, if you or others would like a resolution that somehow states that, you know, between having additional revenue from the sales tax and hopefully growth in businesses, it relieves pressure on these other tax and gives us the opportunity to keep those as low as possible, I could buy into that resolution.
Well, you know, when we went
The
through
voters
this-
have they feel, or at least the ones that I've talked to, I'm just talking about the ones that I've talked to, that if the city anticipates keeping TUF at the same rate and collecting the sales tax as well on top of it, they're not going to go for it.
And that's a different statement.
you know what I was starting to say, when we went through this whole thing on the TUF, Mike, and probably you did too, said that we're going to assume that we're not going to get any more development ever.
Yeah.
That's what we kept saying. We're operating on the scenario that this is it.
Most conservative value.
That's right. And that's how we did it, that the gateway wouldn't come up, nothing would happen. And now all these things are looking better. So it will change, and that's probably...
And I think it would require some kind of promise from the city to the voters on the sales tax, that is what would happen. It would be utilized to alleviate the overall burden.
But I think there's a cart and a horse, isn't there? You know, we don't know the sales tax for how many months after.
We don't know what additional TUF
Years.
we're gonna get from year to year either, or how it's
We
gonna.
can anticipate TUF.
We don't know how much
Sales
it's
tax
gonna
is a
change.
three-legged stool.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know what we're going to get in sales tax in a year.
We've got a pretty good idea.
Yeah, I mean, you can be plus or minus, and depending on economic conditions, you're not going to be too far off.
If the East Gateway goes, we won't generate anything off of that for probably 5 to 8 years. Because
I
the money-
disagree, John, because
the
not
money-
only will they shop there, but they'll be stopping off at restaurants along the way, because we're the restaurant
Okay,
city
but
of
the
Kansas
money
City.
that is generated from taxes totally goes to paying off the star bonds.
From that
Everything goes on
location,
it, From
but-
each location.
But there's
We
other
generate
locations,
nothing.
there's other locations that they can stop at as well, so.
Well, and there's
I
a
can
few
see-
other things that you have to remember that are in place. Whatever the sales tax dedication is, the great thing about a transportation utility fee, the single largest trip generator, if the East Gateway is built, is the aquarium. And I've talked to Tom, understand that, you know, you will then you'll go to number one in terms of who has to contribute to the transportation utility fee. And I think we shouldn't discount that development is significant in its impact on the potential rate. It could change rates 15, 20 to 25%, what you charge all of the users. I mean, good news for Tom, he might be the number one, but his rates go down because he's generating more trips and we're held at a single dollar amount. And the most important thing is to remember 1.5 million every year for 10. If we can do that, we think we can get to a PCI of 80, which will allow us to construct those projects that are in our CARS list and then maintain the streets that we have. What the idea is that you had to pick a number and say, can we live with this number over a period of time, and will that number be sufficient enough to get up to our streets up to a PCI level where we can maintain them, and we think we can.
Have you talked to him lately about the newscast that came out that the Nordstrom rack store is going out to Olathe?
But you know,
Well, no, it's going across from Nordstrom at 95th.
Yeah.
they also said it's one of many potentially coming. That made me feel a little bit better when I heard that. That may not be the only one.
I don't believe there are going to be more than one Nordstrom rack store.
Probably not.
Well,
Almost all of them are located within proximity of a Nordstrom.
But look,
Yeah.
but they said that going into this long ago, that the model is normally, the rack is very close to where the Nordstrom store is, and that's okay. I mean, the good news is that the development in the East Gateway has been altered and is more focused in on office, and we still have the retail component, we still have the aquarium component, the hotel, and so from that standpoint, that's okay. I mean, it's good news that somebody's coming to town, it's good news that somebody's ready to sign a lease. I mean, I saw those as positive indicators.
You know how much empty office space there is within 25-mile radius of Mission?
Yes, I do,
Okay.
but I also understand that there's also, you know, if you believe what Tom says, and I do, that there are a lot of businesses that want their own identity. There are a lot of businesses that want the location that we have, that have no interest in being on the Sprint campus, that have no, they want the Kansas benefits, they don't want to be on the Missouri side, they don't want to be out south. They live in Mission Hills, they want to be central to the city, and our location has always been one of our greatest assets. So, yeah, I mean, I get that there's empty office buildings, but I'm also telling you that I think that you're going to see office being a big component of what's going to go up out there.
And then I think the other thing that we have to be cognizant of is that however biotech develops within this corridor, the things that concern me is that, you know, the KU campus and all of those properties continue to expand. If you look at what happened to Westwood when Sprint goes from a taxpayer to the university owns it and pays no taxes, and there is no utility, all of a sudden there's trip generation, there's services delivered, and there's no way to get repaid.
Go talk to the fire district.
Right.
I mean, you look at all of the buildings that are the one building that's come off the tax roll. Now there's the other one in the Fairway Park, and there's going to be two more. And they are big medical users. And you look at what that is doing to services with fire, because they can't collect a tax.
Right.
They can't collect it.
And I think you have to be concerned because a lot of on the medical side, there's a lot of 501c3. They don't pay taxes, but yet they generate trips and they eat services. I mean, I'm guessing that the old Sprint campus is probably fire district's #1 or #2 call in terms of false alarms, easily 1 or 2. And for medical calls, it probably is #1.
I mean, it's amazing how many people have shortness of breath that just can't get a ride.
And collectively, we all pay for it since they pay nothing in terms of taxes or fees.
And the small businesses.
Uh-huh.
Well, I keep going back to the last statement you made and thinking about it. Once again, if the question is, would I be willing to support some type of direct connection between a passing of a sales tax and a decrease in the TUF, the answer for me would be no. However, I do think about what type of promise we're making to the taxpayers by putting that sales tax on the ballot and asking them to approve it. And the closest model that comes to mind right now of where there's been frustration locally is a few years ago, Kansas City, Missouri put on a sales tax to support their transit system. And after that passed, then some of the money that had been funding the transit system went other places. And some of the taxpayers, and this has been a hot issue this past winter, and Ed Ford's been fighting it on their council to get some of that restored with Schulte, the city manager. What I would be willing to look at, what I'd want to make sure, is that we are being not only honest with the taxpayers on what we're asking for, but that then we're not going to do some sleight of hand to pull the rug out from under them. No, now, it's not a direct correlation, but I would be willing to look at, I mean, I think it would be important to look at some type of resolution that puts that pact between the city and the taxpayers and looking at some type of not having us well, now that you gave us $500,000 a year on the sales tax, we're going to start spending willy-nilly over here. So I would be more than happy to look at ways we can have that discussion.
So what's the way ahead? What's the timeline on this?
Well, what's nice is Lawrence, by accident, on number 2 said, come up with a framework for the construction of these projects. The other ones on this list. And I think you start with that framework and say, okay, these are our construction projects. If this is what we need in terms of, Bruce, or if you dedicate $500,000 over a 10-year period, it pays for $4 million in improvements, okay? That's what a quarter cent does. And I don't think we should be so quick to discount what a half cent is. And when you're looking at the mix, but I would also tell you that it's good to have a mix of revenue sources because you don't know when things are going to change in sort of the economic environment. And if all of your stuff is in sales tax and all of a sudden people stop consumption or reduce it by 20%, all of a sudden the projects you thought you were paying for, you can't. So the better you can keep the mix, the better off you are in the long term trying to finance, infrastructure. And I think the other thing that we don't do a good job of telling people is that a lot of what's on the City of Mission's portion of the tax bill is dedicated to infrastructure. I don't know what portion of the county, I think there's just 24 mills, but I can't imagine more than 10% of that 24 mill is dedicated to infrastructure, meaning that twice what our mill rate, which the county collects from our citizens, goes to fund operations. And that sort of gets missed in the discussion. I think we're really good stewards in that we've dedicated really a big chunk of our budget to do infrastructure and to invest in the creeks and to invest in the streets, to invest in those things that we hope bring redevelopment.
As we should.
Yeah.
So Mike, did what you just say, you said a quarter cent brings approximately $4 million in 10 years, and you're recommending that we would apply that to debt service if we were to levy it so that it doesn't get caught up in star bonds. Right. And you're saying we could marry that with whatever this roadmap you come back with and see how it matches up. And
then you figure out, okay, we need this much less of TUF or this much more of sales tax. And then I think we have to be honest that the special, I don't know how long the state will continue to fund special highway. Let's just assume that they do it for another 2 years. But my guess is it isn't forever. But understand that represents, $250,000 out of 1.5 million. So what, 16% of the total pot that you have to be willing to replace as you go forward. Understanding that that money has been there for 30 years and now it's not going to be there anymore. Just like LAVTR, just like special city county. I mean, there's been a lot of tax shifting that's occurred over the last 10 years. And because it's been incremental, most people don't know what's happening because it's not something that ever gets a lot of coverage in the paper. I mean, if I were to say, do the citizens of Mission know that because of changes at the state level, we've lost $5.5 million in revenues over the last 10 years? And the answer would be no. Nobody knows that. How far does $5.5 million go to covering those projects that are on that list? It goes a long way. But it doesn't make a headline because it's been incremental. It's been slow.
But if we know that we're shooting for $1.5 million every year, and that's what TUF and our other funding sources are projected to do each and every year, we have to readjust TUF each year as, in accordance with our other funding supplies or sources. With the quarter cent sales tax added to those funding source mix, we're still able to adjust TUF to the $1.5 million in accordance with our other sources.
I agree with the logic. The problem there, we're not to 1.5 million yet. We don't have the 1.5 million identified yet.
Well, that's then what's the purpose of the TUF if we don't have it identified?
Well, no, the TUF is only, it was 830. Now we're planning, we were planning Mike said, I think earlier, 750 a year was the planning purpose of that. That was half of the 1.5 million. From a planning purpose perspective, the sales tax of 500 was most of the other half.
Yeah, 1.25 million.
So that's where I have issue connecting the two, as you were suggesting the voters want us to do, is because we're not at the 1.5 already.
But that quarter-cent sales tax is based on current,
As it is today.
as it is today. So, you know, to Will's point, a quarter-cent sales tax in the city of Mission 3 years from now could be substantially more than $500,000.
Yeah.
Significantly more. Correct. The East Gateway and the West Gateway both take off as planned. I mean, that could be $1.5 million by itself. $1 million.
No. Quarter cent?
Well, but it has to be
It could be
dedicated.
increased, is my point.
Yeah, yes. Not $1.5 million though.
Well, you don't know that. It could be.
If you're gonna triple our sales tax revenues in this city, man, you've got some good stuff
All
going.
I'm saying is.
Target's having a sale.
Big sale.
Go get more toothbrushes.
But no, I don't disagree with you, Dave. I mean, I'd like to see that $500,000 number go up by increased sales tax. I'd like to see the TUF.
So Lawrence, what you would support is language in there that associated the two but didn't require or mandate that it be a one-for-one in terms of TUF versus the quarter-cent sales tax.
Yes, one, because I don't think they are directly tied, but secondly, because we're not at the 1.5 million. If we're at the 1.5 million already, we already had that identified, and we're saying, okay, we're looking at replacing some of the 1.5 with this 500, then I'd say, oh yeah, I completely agree. But since we're not there yet, you know, if you take one away for one, then you're still at the same spot you're at. You haven't gotten there.
No, it makes sense. I understand your point.
But yes, I mean, if the amount of sales tax can increase because of redevelopment and new properties come online, which widen the tax base of the TUF, so the rate can go down, you know, I think that's all what we're trying to do. At least that's, you know, I think that would be a great thing.
So I think you always have to guard against the fact that you can start losing large sections of commercial simply because you have a change in maybe a use. I mean, all of a sudden Script Pro's KU Bio's Center 2, and all of a sudden a large property taxpayer is no longer paying property taxes and exempted, and if you don't have a transportation utility, you collect no money. I mean, none. And I think you have to be aware that those things can happen over the life of the community.
We already got gigged on sales tax from Script Pro.
And you have to be, and I think part of this is what's playing out at the national level. And there's this concern that, you know, that we need to have smaller government, and I don't disagree. We have 88,000 local governments. Does anybody think we might have, I don't know, 80,000 too many? I mean, that's a lot of local government. And that,
Well, baby.
and number 3 in terms of districts and governments is the state of Kansas. On a per capita basis, we're like one of the top. I mean, we have more districts, commissions. And I listen to the discussion, and I listen to the debate, and I listen to people say that we need to consolidate school districts in the West. Well, how about consolidate school districts in Johnson County? Have you counted how many we have? And then I just look at the debate over Shawnee Mission trying to close a few schools or reorganize them. And I have a fear that even here, in 20 years, you'll see the Kansas City, Missouri constriction. It'll be different, but all of a sudden it becomes, you have to close 15 or 18 because you won't make the necessary changes as the community changes. And I think, I love to hear the rhetoric, but I yet to see anybody demonstrate how they're going to make government smaller. And the way you make it smaller is you do less stuff. And I kind of feel that one of the things that we should invest, the most important thing we can invest in isn't trying to create more services. It's to create an infrastructure and an environment in which residents and small businesses and big businesses can flourish. And that's good streets, and that's good stormwater, and it's a lot of things that aren't really sexy, and they have to be financed really by a collection of people. It's not, there's not a magic bullet on how you finance all of this. It's a lot of different sources.
So what is your thought about timeline for, are we thinking the fall?
I think we do Lawrence's framework, and I think Will's, you know, what is it that we have? What is it that we're collecting? And I think there's already a feeling that if we're collecting enough, then what is it that will reduce the burden on collecting the transportation utility fee? And I get Lawrence's point of not tying the two together, because you want to keep as many resources available to, but at the same time, I think there's an implied feeling that any revenues that we identify in excess of 1.5 million go to reduce whatever the transportation utility fee is.
But there's a time in there, I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, you can't just put this on the ballot tomorrow if you chose.
No.
There's a lot of steps you have to go through.
And my guess is it ends up being towards the fall, but I think it becomes a really good discussion to have as you're putting the
Well, I
budget
do
together.
too.
Because I think you have to be clear on what your direction is, because the voters want to know, okay, you adopted a budget, what did it include, and what did it say about transportation utility fee? And what does that mean when I go to vote on the sales tax?
That's actually another important point to me, Will, is that while the sales tax is being discussed specifically for capital on the streets, I heard a lot of discussion last year, I suspect my other council members did as well, on concerns regarding waste in our operating budget. And I want to make sure that we have had another crack, another look at the operating budget for 2012 and try to address any of those concerns we can before asking for more money on a capital project. Because
maybe you identify dollars that you can dedicate.
Some voters out there say, well, see, you're just masking your operating expenses that you shouldn't be running, and you're asking for more taxes, and I'm sensitive to those concerns, and I want to make sure we address those before asking them for money. That's just another thought I have. I don't know if you share that or...
I think it was a part of that, as well as the extravagance of projects that have been undertaken in the past.
Okay.
And just get more bang for the buck.
Okay.